Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video I have my Game Week 36 preview and there are only 3 game weeks left now, back-to-back doubles and then the final Game Week 38. Of course the focus this week will be on the double game week and specifically Newcastle and Brighton, which are the 2 teams that double, and we're also going to have a bit of a chat around differential players that can hopefully shoot you up your mini leagues towards the back end of the season. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So as always, I asked for your questions over on Twitter for these Game Week preview videos, and really they all revolved around 3 main topics. Brighton Assets, specifically Solly March, but also other Brighton Assets to consider. Newcastle Assets, maybe some of the midfielders that we should consider, and Isak versus Wilson. And then also some potential differentials that we could pick if we are struggling to work our way up the mini leagues in the final 3 weeks. Are there any spicy picks that I like the look of? So those will be the 3 sections for today. Brighton, Newcastle, differentials, and then that'll be that. So starting with Brighton Assets, here are all of the Brighton Assets that I would probably consider. There are 10 options here. There are, of course, options like a Caicedo or a Colwill if you want to go there. A Jason Steele. I haven't discussed the goalkeepers in this video because they're just goalkeepers. If you like the look of them, go for them. But these are the main 10 that I would potentially consider, and I do think that some of them are definitely better assets than others. I will discuss Solly March's data with the rest of them, and then right at the end, I will discuss if Solly March is confirmed injured or we think he will be out, which looks very likely at the time of recording this on Tuesday evening. What would I do with Solly March? Would I sell him to someone like a McAllister, or do you just go for 2 Brighton assets? So when we look at the data, I've got their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 since Game Week 17, so post-World Cup. I've also got their projected points just for Game Week 36, and I've also got their average minutes over the last 6 as well. Now, the reason I've done average minutes over the last 6 is just to give you a bit of an idea. Are they starting and getting regular minutes for their team at the moment? And I feel like sometimes looking over a slightly shorter period of time is useful when we're looking at minutes. And as you can see, that final column there is actually effective ownership. Now, usually I would always recommend right up until this point of the season that you don't really let ownership affect your decisions. I don't think you should pick a player just because they are highly owned or avoid them because they're highly owned or vice versa. I think you should pick the players that you think will score you the most points. But there are only 3 game weeks left now, and I do think that if you are 30 or 40 points behind your mini league leader, or maybe you're, I don't know, 20 points off the top 100k, and that's been your aim all season, it may well be that you need to start taking risks now. Equally, if you're first in your mini league or in a position like me, I'm ranked something like 8.5k. I would love a top 10k finish. This is probably the time of the season when you can start thinking, if there's a highly owned player that I don't currently own, maybe I play a little bit safe. Like if you don't already own Mitoma, who's 86% owned, maybe play a little bit defensive. So that's the reason this ownership column is now into these tables, because I don't usually recommend it. All of that to be said, let's have a bit of a discussion around the Brighton assets for Game Week 36 and also beyond as well, because they do have back-to-back doubles in 36 and 37. So the 3 main assets that we've been talking about for a while now are the 3 midfielders: Solly March, McAllister, and Mitoma. Of course, we have the potential injury to March, but when we look at the data, March has, for a while now, had the most consistent data out of all of the Brighton assets. You can see here he's got a 0.87 non-penalty expected goal involvement post-World Cup. So Solly March is that guy. If you're looking at data, he's the one. Obviously, the injury is a slight issue, and we don't know if that's been the reason that he's been benched in the last couple, because he hasn't started 2 in a row now. As you can see, his average minutes over the last few is 64. So I wonder if it was that he had a potential knock. De Zerbi said he wasn't in his best moment, but he didn't comment on whether that was a mental thing, a tactical thing, or a physical injury-related fitness thing. However, it doesn't look good for him regardless. He pulled up with his hamstring. So let's assume that Solly March is probably out. How do McAllister and Mitoma compare? Well, actually, interestingly, McAllister and Mitoma's data is very, very similar now. A few weeks ago, maybe 6 or 7 weeks ago, McAllister's data was so much better because he was playing that number 10 role. But more recently, McAllister has dropped into that 6 role alongside Caicedo, and the more defensive he plays, the worse his data gets. And when we look across the entire season with McAllister, his data tends to sit around a 0.4 expected goal involvement when he plays defensive mid. If you're not overly interested in statistics, essentially McAllister in the defensive role is not a particularly great FPL option from open play. That being said, he is on some corners, he is on some free kicks, and he is absolutely excellent at taking penalties. So a 0.4 non-penalty expected goal involvement with penalties, with corners, with free kicks isn't actually terrible. And I do still love McAllister for that reason. And we saw in the Everton game state is very important. When Brighton are losing or when they need a few goals, McAllister will still play alongside Caicedo, but he drifts a little bit further forward and he almost becomes more of an advanced number 8 as opposed to a number 6. So I still love McAllister. McAllister has been my boy all season. I chose him ahead of Mitoma and March. I absolutely love him. I will continue to have him in my team. I don't think he's as good of an option as he was 6 or 7 weeks ago. I do still think potentially March to McAllister might be worth it. We'll discuss that again in a second, but I do still like the look of McAllister. I just don't think he's quite as good as he was a few weeks ago. And I think it is worth considering his 2 goals in the last 2 game weeks. One was a last-minute penalty, and one he fell over and it bounced off his shoulder. Now, he had opportunities to score goals in both games outside of that. He actually had one header saved, and he hit the crossbar with another header against Everton. So I do really like McAllister. He's getting chances. But do just take into account, if he didn't get that penalty, and it didn't luckily bounce off his shoulder when he was on the floor, would we still be talking about McAllister in the same sense? Probably not. Mitoma has actually had an improvement in data in recent weeks. As you can see, his data is actually better than McAllister's now. So a 0.58 non-penalty expected goal involvement. The funny thing about Mitoma is earlier in the season, Mitoma was massively overperforming his expected data. His data wasn't good, but he was finishing everything. His data's actually really improved now, and he's finishing nothing. So we're almost having 2 sides of the story where hopefully soon we'll see a bit of regression to the mean, and Mitoma's data will probably calm down slightly, but it will start to finish his chances again. I still think that Mitoma is the best midfielder to own for the final few weeks. He's a combination of being pretty nailed. I know he was benched recently, but pretty nailed, really decent data, and he passes the eye test, and he'll continue to get opportunities. So for me, if you don't own Mitoma and you do own March to Mitoma is a really straightforward transfer. In my opinion, I would do that without even thinking about it. If you own March and Mitoma and you're thinking, is March to McAllister worth it? I feel like that's a slightly trickier one because there are some other really nice midfielders that you could go for, or you could just bench March and play someone like a Trent or a Shaw who's probably sat on your bench at the moment. So, like I said, March to Mitoma easy, March to McAllister a little bit trickier. Let me know down below if you do own Solly March yourself. Are you going to sell him? If so, who are you selling him to? Or are you going to bench him and just play one of your other players who has a decent fixture this week? Regarding the rest of the Brighton assets, we'll quickly move on to the defenders. I don't like the double in 36 or 37, particularly from a defensive perspective. So my opinion on Brighton defenders is if you do own a Brighton defender already, I would probably still start them ahead of most single game week players. So if you want to start them ahead of a Luke Shaw, I would still probably start Estepinian and Dunk ahead of him. But I wouldn't be going out and buying a Brighton asset at the moment. Their defensive data is okay, but the fixtures aren't fantastic. And I feel like there is more value in their attackers and some of the other defenders from other teams as well. So Estepinian and Dunk would probably be an avoid if you're looking to buy, but I don't mind playing them and I don't mind starting them. Estepinian's data is okay, 0.21 expected goal involvement. Dunk's is pretty average, but decent for a centre-back at 0.11. So I don't have an issue with them, but I wouldn't be going out and buying them. There are some other spicy picks in there as well. The other options we got are Welbeck, Gross, Ferguson, and Enciso Buonanotte. Apologies for butchering his name. I think out of all of these options, I'm actually most interested in Enciso if you're looking for a slightly spicy attacking pick. The reason for that is his data is really, really good at 0.87 non-penalty expected goal involvement, and he's actually averaging about 55 to 60 minutes. So he's starting most games and coming off early as a sub. He might get the odd game bench, but especially with March now being out, there is one more spot. If March is out, of course, there is now one more spot in the attack, and I feel like Enciso will get slightly more minutes as a result. So for me, if you're looking for a spicy pick, looking at the data, looking at eye test and potential minutes, I think I like Enciso the most. I don't mind Welbeck and Ferguson, but as you can see here, Welbeck's average minutes over the last 6 is 51, and Ferguson's is 36. Of course, both of them, especially Welbeck, has suffered with fitness issues recently, so maybe that plays into it a little bit. But I just don't know who's going to start. Will it be both of them? Will it be one? It could be Enciso up top and Buonanotte on the right, and then Mitoma on the left and McAllister through the middle or something like that. It could even be Undav coming in. So there are so many options that they can play with. We just don't know. That would probably put me off of Welbeck and Ferguson. And then Buonanotte, again, apologies for butchering his name. I should have looked how to pronounce it before the video, is really not great for data. His minutes are about the same as Enciso's, but a 0.37 non-penalty expected goal involvement. I would just probably rather to have Enciso in my team. So that's probably what I think about all of the other differentials. Just a note on Pascal Gross, because I feel like this is an interesting one. His data's not great either at non-penalty expected goal involvement of 0.37, but I do like the fact that he gets 90 minutes. A lot of these players, like in CISO, I'm saying he's got a great non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. If he's not getting 90 minutes, then that doesn't really matter, whereas Pascal Gross does. So whilst his data looks slightly underwhelming, he is still getting enough minutes. And at right back, I actually think he's slightly more attacking than when he plays defensive midfield, because he bombs up that right wing, he gets in a good amount of crosses. We've seen in recent weeks, he actually whipped in a beautiful cross with his left foot from the right back position. And he is also on a lot of set pieces as well, a lot of corners from the right-hand side and also free kicks. And if McAllister does come off and potentially Welbeck's not on the pitch, I do believe that Pascal Gross is probably next in line for penalties. So there is the small chance where, as you can see, McAllister's got 79 minutes on average over the last 6. Pascal Gross could take a last-minute penalty if McAllister's not on the pitch. So I do actually like Pascal Gross more than the data probably suggests. And as you can see, 0.2% effective ownership. If you're looking for a slightly different midfielder, I don't mind the idea of going for a Pascal Gross. But for me, McAllister and Matoma are the best two to own. Most of us already own a defender. So I feel like that is your triple up probably, along with maybe a Jason Steele if you don't have Estepinian or Dunk. So I don't know that I would be desperately looking at the other Brighton assets. But if I was, it would be Enciso or Pascal Gross. Probably Enciso for a slightly spicy pick. Pascal Gross for security of minutes. Let me know down below, are you going to own a Brighton triple up for game week 36? And if so, which 3 will you own? If you're only owning 2, where are you going with those transfers? Or are you just going to bench Solly March? So moving on to the Newcastle assets, and I think there are slightly less options. So I've actually got 8 options here. I suppose the only notable omission here is Murphy. The only reason that Murphy's not on here is he's just not getting enough minutes. He's not made it to 70 minutes in the last 6 weeks. He's been subbed off at 45 and 55, and then around 60 minutes the rest of the time. So I just don't feel like, for me, that's worth it, especially when there are some other really nice picks from Newcastle. We'll actually finish with Wilson and Isak. I'm just going to discuss some of the other players around them too, because I know they will be the most popular too. St. Maximin looks like he's back now. I don't feel like he's probably quite there, unfortunately, for this double. But if you do want to take a punt on him, when he plays, his data is exceptionally good. So non-penalty expected goal involvement post-World Cup is 0.55. In the last couple of weeks where he's featured a little bit, his data immediately off the bench is super strong. And I do feel like he is pretty spicy. I mean, he's owned by 0 managers in the top 100k, so I don't mind him at all. I just worry that his minutes aren't going to quite be enough in this double. But if you really do want to go for a spicy pick, I quite like him. Outside of that, the midfield picks, we've got Willock and Joelinton, and I feel like these two will be very, very popular because they are the only two, in my opinion, real midfield picks that you can go for. Willock's obviously the cheapest at 4.7 and then Joelinton at 6, but I don't feel like budget is a massive issue for most people. So who is the better midfielder out of Willock and Joelinton? I feel like Joelinton is slightly more nailed, and when he plays in an advanced left-hand side role, I actually think Joelinton is probably the slightly better pick. However, as far as I'm aware, let me know if I'm wrong below, Newcastle fans, Longstaff, there is a good chance that he's out for game week 36, or at least the first fixture. If that is the case, unfortunately, I think Joelinton moves out to the right, and he's just not quite as effective on the right, slightly more defensive, and it just isn't his natural role. He's much more effective on the left, cutting in, getting the opportunity to score goals. So if Joelinton's on the right, I slightly prefer Willock. If Joelinton's on the left, and potentially even on the left wing, I much prefer Joelinton. I feel like the left wing's almost definitely not going to happen. They've got Gordon, they've got St. Maximin, they've got Isak if they want to play Wilson through the middle. So I feel like he's playing a midfield role. It's just whether he plays on the left or right. As you can see, his data here is 0.37 non-penalty expected goal involvement. It's absolutely fine for a budget midfielder, but nothing overly crazy. But as I said in the previous section with Pascal Gross, the good thing about Joelinton is most of the time he gets 90 minutes. So I do really like him. I don't have an issue with you picking him. For me, I just slightly prefer Willock. He's got greater goal threat, slightly better data, and I just feel like he has the opportunity to pop up with some bigger hauls just because he plays a slightly more advanced role. And I just feel like when I watch the games, this is a bit of an eye test thing. When I watch the games, Willock always seems to be popping up in the box. Maybe one of the main reasons for that is he actually accumulated close to 2 expected goals against Manchester United, my team, and he just kept on popping up in the box. So I just feel like Willock's got slightly higher ceiling. I prefer him slightly, but I feel like Joelinton and Willock are both fine as picks. I wouldn't expect a massive amount from either of them, but they are both solid if you can't get to the doubled strikers, or maybe you want to drop one of your defenders as a potential option. Speaking of the defence, Newcastle's defensive data is still absolutely fine. It's still really strong, and I have absolutely no issue with double Newcastle defence. The issue is that we love both of the strikers, and there are some decent midfield picks too. I still feel like Trippier is absolutely fine. As you can see here, he's got the same expected expected goal involvement as Willock, better than Joelinton, and it's actually close to approaching Isak. Like, his data is really, really solid. I have absolutely no issues with keeping Trippier. I actually don't mind him as a captaincy option, to be honest. The only thing is, again, I'm not overly keen on the double from a defensive perspective. They're playing against Brighton, who score goals, and Leeds have to score goals as well in this game. It's absolutely critical to them. So I feel like both teams will probably go after them and try to score. So I think I slightly prefer the attackers from a captaincy perspective, but I don't mind Trippier. Just worth noting, Fabian Schär's data continues to be really strong. A 0.27 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Botman's is nowhere near. So if you're deciding who to bring in out of Botman and Schär, or if you're wondering whether a sideways move from Botman to Schär is worth it, it probably is. Fabian Schär has shown across the entirety of the season he is a serious goal threat and assist threat too, whereas Botman just doesn't have much outside of the odd clean. I know he's got the odd assist here and there, but mainly it's clean sheet and a couple of bonus points is what you're expecting from him. So Fabian Schär and Trippier are great. Botman's okay, but I wouldn't mind potentially selling Botman just due to the lack of attacking threat. Finishing with Wilson and Isak. So this is a really tricky one for me because I think it basically comes down to minutes. As you can see, over the last 6, Wilson has averaged 52 minutes per game, which kind of sums up what you expect from him. He'll start some, he'll come off the bench and others, but he's going to get you nowhere near to 90 minutes on average. And then Isak has been averaging 73, which again paints the story of he'll start most games and he'll come off early in most, and he might be benched in the odd one here and there, usually a midweek fixture. So Isak is definitely higher for expected minutes. But if they were to play, let's just say a hypothetical situation where Isak and Wilson play a similar amount of minutes, I genuinely do prefer Wilson. He's a greater goal threat. I still believe if both are on the pitch that Wilson takes the penalty. And I just feel like he's more likely to get you a monster haul. You can see here his non-penalty expected goal involvement is 0.94. It's absolutely exceptional. And it was brilliant last season. It was good the season before. He's even achieved, I think in his season at Bournemouth when he did really well, it was about a 0.6 non-penalty expected goal involvement too. So Wilson has shown on a consistent basis that he can maintain really, really good goal threat. So if they got similar minutes, I would prefer Wilson. The issue is I don't think they will. And if one of them is going to start both games, it's going to be Isak. And I actually think there is a good chance that he does. There's 6 days between Newcastle's most recent game and the first game of game week 36. And then there's a bit of a break, but not a massive one, between the second game. Newcastle are fighting for top 4 still. I mean, after recent results, they aren't nailed on to get the top 4. So I feel like they need to continue playing their best team. And Isak is their best striker at the moment. Whether he plays alongside Wilson or not, I've got absolutely no idea. It didn't work particularly well against Arsenal, but I think they played both against Southampton and that did work quite well. So let's see, I guess. But for me, if I had to predict right now, minutes-wise, and this is just a prediction, I think Isak starts both, comes off early in both, probably around 60, 70 minutes, maybe gets 80 minutes in one, and I would expect Wilson to start one and be benched in the other. So if I'm predicting total minutes, I think Isak gets something like 150 to 160 minutes in game week 36, and I think Wilson gets something closer to 90 to 100 minutes. And as a result, despite me preferring Wilson as an option and his data, I still think Isak is the slightly better pick just because I think his expected minutes are higher. All of that to be said, if you think that Wilson will start both, or if you think both Wilson and Isak will only start one, i.e. they'll get a similar amount of minutes, I would go for Wilson, definitely. Then I guess the final thing to discuss is, should you have both Wilson and Isak? I feel like if you've only got 2 Newcastle assets at the moment, maybe you've got an Isak and a Trippier, and you've got a third spot open, Wilson is a dead cert obvious pick for me. However, I feel like if you've already got Isak, Trippier, and Botman, for example, as I do you sell Botman to get Wilson, which requires 2 transfers, just to switch from a very decent Newcastle defender to a minutes risk Newcastle attacker? I don't know the answer to that at the moment. At the moment, though, I'm probably leaning no, just because I don't think Wilson starts both, and I think Botman still has a chance for a clean sheet in one or both games. And just by appearance points alone, he's going to get you 4 or 5 points. So 4 points, or 3 or 4 points, I suppose. So I don't mind Botman for that reason. I feel like there is the chance for the clean sheet there. But Wilson obviously has a much higher ceiling, in my opinion. And if he does start both, he's a great option. So it's a tricky one. I would love to know what your opinions are down below. I suppose the final point on Wilson Isak is around ownership. Like I said, if you are chasing, Wilson will have significantly lower ownership than Isak. I would predict Wilson to be, I would say, about 15 to 20% in the top 100k. I would expect Isak to be up at 60 to 70%. So if you want to play defensive, bring in Isak. If you want to attack, bring in Wilson. I still feel like Isak, just due to minutes, is probably the slightly better option. But again, I would love to know some of your thoughts on that down below in the comments. So in this final section, we're going to have a bit of a chat around some of the differential assets that I like for Game Week 36 to Game Week 38. Again, I don't usually like taking ownership into account, but I do occasionally, especially at the end of the season, when I feel like you want to try and chase in your mini leagues or try and achieve that overall rank that you've been aiming for. So all of these, apart from Jota, who's at 10.6% in the top 100k, are below 10%, and a lot of them are below sort of 1 or 2% as well. And I feel like all of them, if they get a monster haul, are going to massively boost you up the rankings. Of course, none of these have a double in Game Week 36, but if you do want to go for a differential, I like the likes of, like I said, an Enciso or a Jolington. There are options from Brighton and Newcastle if you want differentials. But all of the differentials here are assets that aren't from Newcastle and Brighton, i.e. they don't double in 36. I do have a favourite from this list, and it is the man on the picture that I'm going to start with, and that is Gabriel Jesus. I really like the idea of him for the final few. I really like Arsenal's fixtures for all three of the final game weeks, especially in Game Week 36, but also Game Week 38 as well. I really like their fixture. And he's getting a lot of minutes at the moment. He's starting every game since returning from injury. His projected points are the highest on this list. His non-penalty expected goal involvement, again, is the highest of all of the differentials I've selected here at 0.73. And he's only 1.5% owned in the top 100k. So if you're looking at it and thinking, maybe you've already got Wilson or you've already got Isak, you don't want to double up and you've got like an Ollie Watkins in there. Firstly, I don't mind keeping Ollie Watkins. Aston Villa have okay fixtures. But let's say you want to spice it up a little bit. Watkins to Jesus definitely would be. No one's going to be going for Arsenal assets in Game Week 36. And I still feel like they are still trying to win the league and they will continue to do so until it is mathematically impossible. So I really like Gabriel Jesus. And when you look at the data, it's really strong. Of course, he doesn't always finish his chances, but I still feel like it's probably worth a punt there. The other two assets that I really like have very similar data, and that is Maddison and Jota. Both can be massive trolls in FPL. They, again, similar to Jesus, don't always finish their chances, but both projected to get a similar amount of points over the final three. Both have very similar non-penalty expected goal involvement, and both have okay fixtures too. And both have demonstrated, not only this season, but in previous seasons, that they do have a monster score in them. And the reason I always refer back to this is some players will tick along really nicely, but will never get you that big 15, 20 pointer, which is what you need really to boost yourself up your mini leagues. Maddison and Jota can both do that. They've both done it in recent weeks, but they've both done it in previous seasons too. So I really like Maddison and Jota. Two players that, because of their troll status, a lot of people will avoid, but I still feel like we'll do really well across the final three, especially Maddison. As long as Leicester are not mathematically, again, relegated, I feel like Maddison will continue to try to get goals and assists and help to keep Leicester up, as he did. I know they didn't do particularly well against Fulham, but Maddison still got 2 attacking returns there, so I do really like him as an option. I've actually got Mitrovic on this list. Remember that guy? As far as I'm aware, he's now back for Game Week 36. Apologies if I'm wrong. I will have to triple check that again. I'm pretty sure Mitrovic is now back. And actually, if you look at Fulham's fixtures, I don't know why it says they have the 19th best fixtures. I actually think Fulham's fixtures over the final three are absolutely brilliant. And I just feel like Mitrovic could have a point to prove after the ban. And he'll definitely be fresh and ready to go. Maybe he won't be fully match fit, but I like Mitrovic as a punt. He, of course, is going to be owned by absolutely no one. So again, if you're looking for a decent third striker and you don't want both Wilson and Isak, I really like Mitrovic. I've actually got 2 West Ham assets on here, Benrahma and Antonio, because again, West Ham have really strong fixtures over the final 3, and West Ham have just started to find that run of form. The only slight concern with West Ham is they are technically now on the beach. They're not mathematically safe from relegation, but they are almost dead cert to be fine. I think it will just be one more game, and then they'll be safe, and then they've got nothing else really to fight for, because they're not going to make their way much further up the Premier League table. So that's the only slight concern, is that maybe there's a bit of rotation in 37 and 38. But I do really like Benrahma and Antonio, both putting up decent data and both getting on the score sheet in recent weeks. I've got Heung-min Son on here just because his data has actually improved slightly recently, but he's very, very expensive. So unless you've just got loads of money for no reason, I feel like he's probably too expensive to go for. But he continues to be nailed, decent data. And if Spurs are going to make a late push in the final few, you would expect Son and Kane to be at the heart of that. So I don't mind Son as a cheeky punt if you want to go there. I've got Calvert-Lewin on here, but again, a bit of a minutes risk and fitness issue, and we just don't know if he'll ever string together enough minutes to be worth it. But when he does play, he's a good option. He's going to be on penalties for Everton. And again, Everton have something to play for. They are going to keep fighting until the very end. So I like DCL if he's going to stay fit. He's going to have to be the one probably to keep Everton up. So I like him. He did look very, very fit against Brighton. So a good option there. And then just to finish up with 2 Crystal Palace assets, they actually have the best fixtures of all of the differentials on my list here. Apparently the 6th best in the Premier League over the last 3. Eze and Zaha are relatively nailed, I think, under Hodgson at Crystal Palace. They'll get good minutes over the final 3. Not great data though. So Eze at 0.35 and Zaha at 0.3. So you are really taking a massive punt here. But Zaha, I think, is just the sort of player that goes on these hot runs right at the end of the season. Everyone always says it's because he's either playing for a new contract or playing to be sold in the summer. But Zaha just tends to find a bit of form towards the back end of the season. So I like him. And Eze has still been getting on the score sheet recently and getting a few attacking returns. So I don't mind Eze as a punt. Let's say you've got Solly March and you don't want to go for a McAllister or a Matoma, or you've already got triple Brighton. You could go for an Eze or a Ben Rama. I don't mind the idea of that. So those are some differentials. I flew through that a little bit just because I think most people this week will be focusing on Newcastle and Brighton assets. In either Game Week 37 or Game Week 38 or both, I'll readdress differential assets again, especially going into the final game week of the season. We'll go through some differentials for that final week because that's really when it's all guns blazing. You just go completely all out to try and get that place that you want in your mini league. But let me know down below, are there any spicy picks that you don't think I've included here who are potentially on your watch list? So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 36 preview, a real deep dive into the Newcastle and Brighton assets, and also a bit of a discussion around differentials that can hopefully help you for the final 3 weeks. If you have been enjoying the content this season and you enjoyed today's video as well, it really would help me if you subscribe to the channel. We are fast approaching 70,000. If you like the video as well, let's go for 1,500 likes on this video and drop some kind of comment down below to feed those algorithm gods. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.